Hi, Naghmeh. It's great to see you again after being together in Chicago very recently. And it's just wonderful to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It was really, really nice meeting you in person after having heard from you from a mutual friend.
That's right. And shout
Yeah.
out to Benji Craig for getting
Uh-huh.
us to meet before we met in person and helping us arrange this interview before we ever met in person. And
Yes.
Benji listens to the show. So, hi, Benji. Thank you, Benji.
Yes. Thank you, Benji.
Yes, everybody knows and loves Benji. So, yeah, it was so wonderful to not only meet you, but get a chance to hear you speak also at the Restore conference and just get to spend a lot of time over meals. And I know you got to ride with my husband in the car ride from the airport because I ended up having another meeting right away as soon as I landed. But our conversations really meant so much to me at the Restore conference. And also getting a chance to get a copy of your book, which is really already making a difference in so many people's lives. But tell us about your book, I Didn't Survive, and why you decided to write it.
Um, well, to help others, I think anyone who's lived a life long enough knows what a journey it is. I don't think I realized that, or many people realize that in their maybe 20s, and then life hits as you get older. And I think going through the trials of life, a lot of times as we go through the fires of trials, we don't really survive. A lot of our way of thinking or things we didn't see before, like abuse or different things, just come to light, and we really, our old self doesn't survive, and we become a new person. Kind of like I describe it to like a caterpillar, kind of going through this cocoon and then becoming a butterfly. And I think a lot of us walk through life that kind of there are processes where that happens, and we really become renewed and changed through that suffering or that trial. Yeah.
It's true. And you have gone through so many things that almost took you out. I mean, the things that you have had to walk through would have been more than most people face in a lifetime, and yet you face so many things. I mean, the beginning I just think of as a child, the immigrant experience. My husband actually just left today. He's in LA doing another one of his trauma recovery weekends for some Afghan refugees. He's flown in a
Mm,
couple of experts to help him do this weekend. And so I know that, the immigrant experience coming from a
yes.
government, especially that's so intense, like where you had to flee in Iran, is full of its own trauma and childhood. So tell us a little
Yes.
bit about what that was like for you as a child to just show up in America after all you had gone through.
Yeah, I actually really enjoy working with immigrants and refugees because I understand, and in a way, working with them is also healing for me.
Mm,
Yeah, I grew up in war, so like some of the refugees I work with, Syrian, now Afghani, and Iraq, and especially Middle East, where I'm from, really understand just the trauma of war and a government that is against you, and then coming to America, to a different world. I grew up in a world where girls went to different school, boys went to different school. I was always afraid of walking out of the house without a head covering. I had really nightmares about it, um, where it was just very much Islamic country with that world. And so coming to America was really strange, from stores where in Iran we had to stand in line for bread to the baker, or stand in line for meat, and also we only got coupons. You only got like a little, like you could only have so much food because of war,
mm,
and there was limits in water. We showered once a week, if that, sometimes once a month, and everything was just so limited, and there was always fear of dying. And then America, I realized one thing that was really strange, that I realized in my own head, was for the first time I could dream about growing up. In Iran, I
mm,
couldn't dream about growing up because I didn't
oh,
know. And so I
mm,
realized when I came to America at 9, I started dreaming like other kids. One of the sentences that was strange to me was kids saying, "I want to be this when I grow up." And I thought, I've never thought about what I want to be when I grow up, because I didn't even think I
wow,
was going to grow up.
mm,
And so just the idea of dreaming about what I wanted to be. And then being in school with boys and girls together and having girls not have head coverings and have makeup. I pretty much end of elementary and junior high with all the makeup and all the craziness. So I kind of was thrown in that world and having boyfriends and Middle Eastern culture that's just like not normal. So feeling kind of strange. I didn't fit in. We came to Idaho shortly after, and I was the only person that was a different color. And a lot of people thought I was maybe Hispanic. They couldn't even understand when I would say Middle East or Iran. At that time, there wasn't a lot of refugees or immigrants in this part of
Mm,
the country. So just getting different reactions from people, whether it was fear of me or a little bit of racism, or if they were just curious. But it just felt weird and strange, and I didn't feel like I fit in. And quickly, I wanted to learn the culture so I could fit in. So
yeah.
I guess being embarrassed to speak Farsi,
Mm,
like if we were out, like I played a little bit of basketball in junior high, and my dad would say something in Farsi. It was like, oh, don't say it. Like just embarrassment
mm,
of the language, or like I don't know. Sometimes in Middle East, there's this thing like until you get married, you don't really do any facial hair removal. So a lot of girls that are not married have like unibrows, and um the day that you actually get married, you do all of that. And so I didn't like, my mom was still very much Iranian, so like you couldn't shave, you couldn't do anything much with body hair, and it was like hard being in this
mm,
culture, coming with parents that still had the other culture where you don't do anything until you get married, and you stay like pretty like natural in every way, like even like with like picking out your eyebrow. Or so it was kind of, I felt comparing myself to this culture, it felt a little bit shameful. Like I wanted to change things about myself to become more integrated and feel like more American. And over the
mm.
years, it's been tough because I haven't really felt fully Iranian anymore because I grew up in America, but I haven't. So a lot of people say like I'm sure you feel that way too when you've been missionary in another, like you're like, I'm really not this culture anymore fully. I have a different
Yeah.
mindset and perspective, but I'm not that culture either. So I'm kind of in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah. It can be hard on the identity, right? As a
Mm,
child. And so that whole third culture kid experience, which you had, and I relate to that part. And my husband and all my kids, my
yep.
husband and I and all three of our kids are all third culture kids, and
Yep.
we don't get our identity from a place. And typically that's the human experience.
Mm,
We get it in other
exactly.
ways,
Yes.
in some beautiful ways, but just some really different ways. And I
Yes.
happen to live in Los Gatos, California, which is right next to Saratoga. And Saratoga, we share a high school district, Los Gatos and Saratoga. And there's a lot of Iranian Americans here, Persians
Yes.
in this
Hmm.
area. In fact, we are walking distance from Vasona Park, and they have the Iranian New Year festival
Oh
there.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
yeah, we went a
Every
couple
spring, every
last
spring.
year. Yeah, in the spring, we went last year and had amazing food, and there was like dancing and singing, and there was a whole like booth. Amnesty International was there where you could send postcards to people who are in jail in Iran for various
Oh,
reasons, and we did that. And just a lot of jewelry with, oh, it was so fascinating. The Persian culture is just so ancient and amazing. And I could imagine as a child showing up in Idaho, which is very white. I wouldn't even know if I could survive there. But
not very
um,
cultural. Yeah.
yeah, that you would feel so different. I mean, to show up as an Iranian into Saratoga would be a whole different experience, although still
Yeah.
challenging. But to show up there must have been very hard and traumatic for you at times.
Well, we actually lived about a year in Bay Area. We lived in San Jose. So I think God
Oh,
gave us
okay.
that transition of, because I didn't even know my ABCs. So I think God gave that
Yeah.
transition of a state that kind of had English as a second language, where Idaho at that time didn't. And
Mm,
so I was like helped after school, and there was people that understood that there's people here that don't speak English. And so I had a little bit of a transition, but still coming
nice.
to Idaho was a little bit of a shock. And
Yeah.
yeah, so and also I think you understand, like the warm culture, and also staying up at night, the streets being busy. and people
Mhm.
getting out late at night and just like eating dinner at 10 and then being out at
Yeah.
shops like because of the, possibly because Middle East is more warm and so people kind of
Mm.
get out more at night. And then Idaho is like everything's shut down at like 7 and you're like, but night
Right.
is when we socialize.
Yeah.
So what do you do? And no one socializes at night. And then each neighbor's in their own little homes. And in the Middle East, you're just used to coming in and out of each other's homes, not just relatives
Mm.
and families, but neighbors.
Yeah.
Um, very much community. So there was a lot of things that was just really strange. It took me a while to kind of adjust to, but yeah. And Tehran was 12 about with the surrounding cities or areas is around 12 million people. It's kind of like New York. And
Yeah.
so coming from 12 million to like 100,000, I think, or less was also pretty shocking. I mean, I was used to apartments
Yeah.
and then it was like, you can have a whole house with a yard.
It's a lot of
So there
room
was
in
just,
Idaho.
yeah, it was just
Yeah.
a lot of things that were just so new to me. So,
Mm. Yeah. I know so many of our listeners can relate to that in various ways. Even just the warm culture, cold culture has been something I've been in and out of throughout my life, right? And so, raised in very warm culture, and then like, and there's a lot of studies on this, right? Warm culture being more relationships, um, more time with your relationships. Time orientation is very different. Cold
yes.
culture is more scheduled, less
Yeah.
relationships, less time with those relationships, more time indoors, less time outdoors. So yeah, it's a very different way of living the human life. And when you're in between those two, especially as a child,
Yes.
it can be really hard. I want to ask you this because I know that with your experience, and we're going to get into some of what you went through and why surviving was harder for you even later in life. Um, but I think sometimes there's stereotypes that we face and we hear about here in the West about Iranian women because of some, perceptions of women that wear hijab that are constantly oppressed and that they're weak somehow and always vulnerable. But you describe in your book how your mom was really tough. She was one of the first women officers in the Shah's army. We have
Mhm.
Narges Mohammadi, who just won the Peace Prize, right?
Yes.
We have Masa Amini, who gave her life for the cause of
Yes.
women in Iran. I
Uh-huh.
feel like my perception of Iranian women is there's a lot of strength. How do you feel like this has often gotten wrong? And how would you describe Iranian women overall?
They're definitely strong women. Yeah, I grew up in a family where my grandma was one of the first women to study pharmacy and not want to just be at home. And my mom was the first woman to be in the military in the Shah's army, and really broke a lot of glass ceilings and a lot of things that were not normal at that time. Also, Masa Amini and the woman that were came after her, the
Yeah.
many martyrs, the many women that were killed for saying, I don't want to wear a head covering. I don't want my religion forced on me. Um, and so I've met amazing, strong Iranian women. Yeah. Um, it's abusive governments or abusive people try to control. You think they try to control weak people, but it's actually sometimes it's trying to like restrain strong people that
Yeah.
because you think of about women in Iran having to wear the hijab or having to like conform to all of this. They must be weak people. It's actually the government, I think, um, or even abusive relationships, which I talk about in my book. They don't
Mm.
always go after the weak. They actually a lot of times go after the strong. Um,
Yeah.
it's kind of like a challenge to subdue them.
Mm-hmm.
Or so it's interesting that women are so much under attack in the Middle East. Now with Afghanistan, I work with a lot of Afghanis. For women not to be educated, it's almost like a
Mm-hmm.
fear that these strong women are going to do something. I work with amazing women that have come out of Afghanistan, or some are still in. I work with one who's a medical doctor, and she's doing amazing work trying to
Mm.
continue to educate the woman and children and, build confidence into them, even though with this new government, there's so much. Girls are not allowed to do as much. No, definitely not get education, not go out. I think they've banned
Mm-hmm.
women from going to restaurants. I mean, there's just so
Yeah.
much. So in a way, I think these restrictions are showing maybe how afraid they are of women. Not that they're
Yeah.
weak. Actually, there's a fear of them maybe, sometimes in fear they try to shut you down. But that's how what I've experienced in Iran is the women are really strong, and that's why the government is so focused on shutting them down. And it's been through women that a lot of times the Iranian people have almost brought on a revolution.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Masih Alinejad, she's really well known in the Iranian community. She was an Iranian reporter for the Iranian regime, and now she's an advocate, and she's in America, and she's had so many death threats. And but she's also a strong woman. There's a lot of strong women that have stood up to the governments and have. Um, and you mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and
Mm-hmm.
that have really had to battle even when you have a strong force coming against you, whether it's government or it's a religious institution or whatever, you really have to become even more. You have to really, I don't know, be strengthened even more, be stronger to break through those. And there's a lot of strong women that are in Iran and outside of Iran that are speaking out and being a voice for the Iranian people.
Yeah. I find it very inspiring. And I find that um, the more we highlight the stories of the strength, the less we are into this sort of pity situation that these women need rescuing, and the
Mm,
more we want to partner with them to let
yes.
their voices be the ones that speak. I was in Abu Dhabi in March for the this conference, Forbes 30 under 30 and 50 over
Mm,
50. And I mean, obviously, being in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, there's just, a lot of incredible women both in that nation and that showed up because there were women
mm.
getting awards like Malala, right? Who received
Yes,
an award for her
yes,
work. And, having spoken with so many of the refugees coming out of Afghanistan to live here in the Bay Area because we have so many, and sitting with them on the couches in their home and hearing about how educated they were, the great work they were doing, and then suddenly it was
yes,
all gone. These are incredibly educated and strong and
yes,
powerful women that I do think they're seen as a threat. But
yes.
I know that that connection that you just made by a strength needing to be shut down
Mm.
is something you experienced, unfortunately, both in your own home with your husband and from some Christian celebrity leaders in the Christian community. So, describe to us what it was like to be experiencing domestic violence from someone who was seen as a good guy,
A
um,
hero, a
a
Christian hero
hero, and not, and how you were somehow seen as a threat when you tried to
came
speak out
out
about it.
about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my husband was I guess a lot of people found out about him around 2012, 2013 when I went to media. He was a pastor who was in prison in Iran, and at the time I came to media about it, which was my last option. We had 6 months of working behind the scenes with the lawyers I worked with and trying to reach different governments that were friendly with Iran to try to get him out. But after 6 months, we realized we couldn't. We gotta get it out on media. Um, the person I was then was very much broken. I did not think I was strong.
Mm-hmm.
My husband had broken me to a point where I didn't trust my own judgment. I didn't trust words that would come out of my mouth, the way I thought, the way I read the Bible, the way I thought about God, everything I thought was controlled by him. And well, are you sure? Like, let's. So I really had, I can say like close to no confidence about how I looked, about what I said. And so his time of his imprisonment really gave me a break from my abuser, which I know a lot of people that come out of abuse. When you have a little bit of a break, the fog starts lifting and you start realizing, oh, this is what I'm under. And so his imprisonment in Iran, I was in America. He had traveled to Iran and then he'd been arrested for his Christian faith. His imprisonment really gave me that break and to kind of start seeing things. And towards the end of, he had been in prison for 3.5 years. About a year before he got released, he got hold of a cell phone and he started messaging me from prison. And here I was, I traveled the world trying to get him out. I'd met with President Obama. I had been called by Trump to his office. He was just about to run for presidency, and met with him. I had met with, like, I had been at the United Nations. I was like literally doing everything I could to get him out. Um, and here he gets a phone. He sees that I am confident. I'm not that weak person that he had made me to be. And he started calling me names from prison, which was very confusing when you're trying to help someone out and they're calling
Yeah.
you a whore or Jezebel or you're nobody. Don't think you're, if anyone's clapping for you, it's because of me. It's not because of you. So it was really confusing to me. I couldn't understand it because I had little to no understanding of abuse. Um, and also, I want to say the Christian culture contributed to that, but I also want to say Middle East sometimes. As a woman in Middle East, you are taught to put up with a lot in marriage, and kind of learn that it's just marriage. And of course, I was deathly afraid of divorce, as I
Mm,
know many people coming from that region are. A lot of people outside of Middle East are, but as a Middle Eastern woman, I know, like, that's such a fear of having
yeah.
that mark of divorce on you. And so I didn't really see an option out of my marriage. But really, God gave me the strength. I became strong. God showed me the strength that He had built in me, because when my husband started calling me names, I drew a boundary. And again, at that time, I didn't know it was abuse. I said, if you can't be nice to me, don't call me from prison. And he actually stopped calling me altogether, which was really embarrassing, because when the Americans were released from Iran, American hostages, um, I had every media at my house. I had Reuters, I had NPR, I had
Yeah.
local, and they're waiting for Saeed to call me, and he's calling everyone else. Like, there's stuff popping up on media, like he just called Franklin Graham, he just called Jay Sekulow, and it was so embarrassing. As his wife that had fought to get him out, he did not call me. So
Wow.
so my first boundary was, don't call me if you can't. I didn't say don't call me. I said, if you can't be nice to me, and he didn't like that. So no phone call at all. And as the phone calls stopped, I was so emotionally attached to him. I was breaking down, because
Mm,
there was a part of me that just really wanted to call him back and really talk to him.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I just kind of threw up in front of this pastor. I was speaking at a church and I was really struggling. I hadn't talked to Saeed for a week. I had drawn my first boundary. I felt guilty about it. He's in
Right.
prison. Why did I tell him not to call back? And so I just kind of threw up in front of this pastor, not throw up, but I was like, I was like, I don't know what to do. And here's my phone. He's sending me all these messages. And I was like, this is how it's been from the beginning of our marriage. I just kind of told him everything. And, a lot of times in every culture, when something happens in your marriage, you don't tell even your parents, because you think, if our relationship mends, then they're still going to hate him.
Yeah.
So everything I had not told, I just told this pastor. I just gave him everything. And I knew this pastor loved Saeed. He had called Saeed a hero. And so this pastor was really shocked, but he gave me a diagnosis. He said, this is really shocking. Saeed's a hero. And he said, but you're an abused wife. And
Mm,
so when I got that diagnosis, I read a lot of, I just ordered, my whole world blew up, because I realized, wow, this is not like a normal problem in a relationship where you like a headache where you take Advil or Tylenol. And this is like,
right.
this is like cancer that needs to go through a chemo. Like, this is not a normal
Hmm.
marriage issue. And
Yeah.
so I studied a lot about narcissism. That's the first time I heard about the word,
Mm,
about abuse, and so I shared with a small group of people. Like, I emailed and I said, I think I'm an abused wife. I've been throughout our marriage. And within hours, I had every media calling me. It was leaked to media. And Said was still in prison at that time. And one of the bullies that called me and told me to be quiet was Franklin Graham. And he really didn't want the story to get out. He said it would damage the cause of Christianity. And um, that my husband was a hero, and um, that if I was quiet, I was gonna have so much. I could have so much fame and money and ministry. And but that at that time I saw it for what it was, and it seems like you know, that I acted foolishly and I tore everything down. I really lost everything, but
Yeah.
actually it was the best thing that happened to us. We became free from a lot of that celebrity Christian culture. My children became free of it, and
Mm,
it really went back to a normal life, which was so good for me and the children.
mm. I just, I've read your story. I've heard your story. You shared this also in your book, and you shared it on the stage at Restore Conference. And every time the part about Franklin Graham comes up, I don't know him. But hey, Franklin, if you're listening to this podcast, you owe a repair to my friend Naghmeh because it's so inappropriate what he did. And I wish it were the only story I'd ever heard similar to this, but the Darvo situation where they victim blame. And this is part of
Yeah.
the culture at large in the United States.
Yes.
It is, but it's extremely powerful in celebrity church culture. And domestic violence is often covered up, and women are
Mhm.
blamed, and women are told to just suck it up and go back to the
Yes.
marriage and be quiet. In your case, you're speaking out somehow was gonna, and it was going to, in his and maybe Franklin's perspective, affect him somehow. But how dare he censor himself when you are the one that needed care? And so I, once again, don't know if Franklin listens to this podcast or if any of you listening have the ear of Franklin Graham, but he owes Naghmeh a serious repair and reparations for what he did to her and her family, because that's unacceptable for anyone, but especially somebody who claims to follow Christ and to be a leader in this community. And I'm just so heartbroken with you that at a time you needed people to believe you and surround you and care for you. Instead, they were making you into the villain. And
Yeah,
so from
that
that
was
experience, yeah,
yeah.
what did you learn from that? How are you processing that now?
That was pretty traumatic because Franklin was just not a big name like Billy Graham's son. He had become a really good friend. He
Mm,
would often send his private jet, and he would take me to the Billy Graham Center to speak, or to
yeah,
Samaritan's Purse, and he really turned on me in an unexpected way. And actually, his first accusation at me was that I was an adulteress, that in some way I was throwing Said under the bus because I was cheating on him and I was wanting to move on with another person, which
it's
was
so outrageous.
so crazy, and it broke
Yeah,
me, and I just cried. I was like, "Why would you say I've committed adultery?" And interesting enough, recently, and over the years, I've wanted a friendship. So what I share about Franklin is like 7 years out. It's not like he
right,
did this and then I was like, like I was
right.
quiet. I kept privately messaging him, like, "Hey, you really have picked the wrong side. Like, I know you
Yeah,
don't understand. Like, let's try to like get you to understand." His sister Anne Graham Lotz tried to explain things to him. And then recently, I think about a year ago, the Washington Post did a story on this whole
yeah.
Franklin Graham thing. And what surprised me the most was he doubled down. And
Mm-hmm.
he said, "Yes, I called her an adulteress. And yes, I would do it again." And I was like, you could have said, like, "I've learned my lesson.
Yeah,
I understand abuse more now. I've seen how things have played out in the last 6, 7 years. No, I just didn't know better." But for him to double down was so. If there's any part of him that ever repents and wants to step into being an advocate for the abused, that would be wonderful. I
it
am
would.
all in. I would love to have him use his voice, instead of suppressing the abused, to
Yeah,
lift them up and to give him the platform that he has. I would love for Franklin Graham to give the platform that he has for abused women and those who've been abused by the church to speak and bring
yeah.
awareness and teach the church. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much the abuse can teach the church. So yeah,
Yeah,
anytime he wants to do that, I'm open. I don't think he likes me right now, but I do like him. I don't like him but I don't hate him. People think I came out with
right.
this because I have like this
No,
fight. I don't hate him. I'm not mad at him, but I would love
yeah.
for him to repent of the way he thinks. That's actually his way of thinking is harming the church.
Yeah. And I mean, we have in the scriptures that we hold dear the story of Zacchaeus. He went and made it right. He gave he made reparations when
Yep.
he realized. And so any day we wake up is a chance to realize we were wrong and to go and make it right. And that's what we are called to do. And I do hope he finds that moment. And but I love that in your heart, whether or not that ever happens, you can move on and you can move
Yes.
forward. And and by moving forward, you are an amazing, strong, smart, articulate, strong, with ancestors who are strong. And I just think that it is so beautiful to see the beauty from the ashes that has come. But at the same time, there's a part of you that didn't really survive. And that's why you titled your book this way. Talk about how you settled on that title and really kind of what it means to you.
Yeah, it's I didn't survive. I look at the person I was. I had to let go of a lot of my way of thinking, of whether it came from my culture, um, having been raised the first 9 years of my life in an Islamic revolution culture where women were being shut down and women were being told that they cannot do certain things. Whether the Christian culture that also said I was to submit, and I was to be a helper, and I was to have a quiet and peaceful spirit and never like speak up or be loud or try to tell men what to do. And that's the culture I was raised in. And it actually worked perfectly with my Middle Eastern culture. So
Yeah.
I was like, oh,
Hmm.
um, and and so I had to it really God had to break me free from all of that wrong understanding.
Hmm.
God values women. God, they're equal. He actually, I think, they're more honored, and you see him honoring women in such a way. You see Jesus
Yeah.
um, giving great revelations like of worship to the woman by the well, to these women that were there at his grave, at his tomb, the
Hmm.
revelation of his resurrection. I mean, I think he actually played a little bit of favoritism in the way he
Yeah.
honored women in a culture, Middle Eastern culture. Those who
Hmm.
understand where women eat in a different room, they sit in a different room. For him
Yeah.
to be with them in the same room and to
Yeah.
honor them and talk to them and have theological discussions about worship with them, and so that's not who God is. And the old me didn't survive. There was a new me
Mm.
that emerged from that, rediscovering and understanding who God really is, not what I was told,
Yeah.
and seeing how much he empowered me to be a voice. He wasn't trying to shut me down and say, you just need to be a little more gentle and a little more soft, which it's good for us to be, but speaking out about injustice and speaking out about abuse or not submitting to abuse doesn't mean we're not gentle. But there's a
Right.
time where you are supposed to speak out, and submitting to any form of abuse or corruption or is actually doesn't honor God at all. And that was the understanding. So I kind of, through the cocoon of suffering, I turn into a different creature, a butterfly. And
Mm.
I also had to trust in the abilities God had given me to fly, to move
Mm.
forward and not second guess and say, what, am I crazy? Do I really have the ability to think properly or convey ideas properly? Which was like how my husband had shut me down. I didn't even trust in my own emotions. If I cried, he would say, "You're trying to manipulate." And I was like, am I trying to manipulate? But I'm really sad.
Wow.
So he wouldn't even let me be sad. He was saying by my tears, I was trying to manipulate other people around me or him. So it was
Mm.
like, even questioning my own emotion, that's
Yeah.
how far I'd gone, where I couldn't show any emotion. And
Mm.
so, yeah, so I didn't survive. I really didn't.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't survive in a good way. The old me, the bound me died,
Mm.
and I was set free.
So beautiful and so much hope. I know that there are people listening to this who currently are experiencing abuse and maybe even domestic violence. I know that emotional abuse is the kind that gets in your head, having been
Mhm.
one who experienced that at the hands of a couple of celebrity pastors and behind closed doors in ways that it was, he said, she said.
Yep.
Um, and so who's going to be believed? The one with the bigger platform, And so when you have those power dynamics, men, women, that power dynamic, and then, your husband being seen as this big deal that people are trying to rescue him from all over the world. And then the power dynamic of you just being a woman and being his wife, like very, very different dynamic that can play into that. And so there are people listening, I'm sure, even women who might be being abused, either in an Islamic context or in a Christian context or any context. What would you say to that woman listening right now that doesn't know how to get free?
Or it doesn't even know they might be abused because it's
Yeah.
probably. Um, I recently read a book called about your body keeps score, something like
Oh,
that.
yeah. I've read that too.
Yeah. Your body starts telling you something's wrong.
Hmm.
You are down, you're depressed, there's anxiety. Even before you can put the word abuse to it, if it's not physical, of course, physical, anything physical is definitely abuse. Unfortunately, having been raised in a lot of the Middle Eastern culture, even that was questionable. But
Yeah.
physical for sure, but emotional, psychological is so hard to see. So the
Hmm.
abuser's goal is to control you. And so they might use emotional abuse, verbal abuse. The Bible, as a Christian, the Bible says our words have the power to kill or bring life. So as Christians, we should really give value to verbal abuse. That's a big deal. We shouldn't be like,
Hmm.
oh, that was just verbal abuse, because the
Right.
Bible says it brings life or death, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and using religion like God to have you submit, and spiritual abuse. Um, and so I know that as a Christian, that's those institutions of marriage or church were put there to protect
Hmm.
and nourish and nurture and actually help you fly, help you be the best person you can be, and not to squash you and confuse you and like cause all this darkness to come over you. So if any institution, whether it's a marriage or work or religious institution or church, that's not helping you thrive, it's actually, you feel like you're dying inside, you feel this confusion. God is not God of confusion. You feel this darkness. You're just really like, you maybe repeat to yourself, like, I just want to die. I wish I was just not alive. Like this feeling of despair, then there's something wrong. And you need to get
Hmm.
out of that institution. And God cares more about you than you trying to keep that institution intact. So whether it's things coming out in a church or in a religious uh, environment or in a home, and you're like, well, if this comes out, then the marriage is gonna fall apart. It's okay. The person's more important. You are more important than the institution. And as a Christian, I believe God came to save the person. Jesus came to save the person, not an institution. So yeah, it's um I think your body starts feeling things even before you can put the word abuse to it. And you're not thriving. You're not being the best that you can be, that God created you to be. You're actually being kind of pushed down, and you feel fog of confusion and darkness, and you don't know what it is. And you're like, am I crazy? Is this real? God is God of clarity. So I would say, if there's any of that going on, if someone would have said, if any of that's going on in your mind, Naghmeh, like look into abuse, like look up that word and see if that's what you're under. I would start with that. I would tell people that.
That's so good. Yeah, there is so much more research now on the brain and how our right brain is perceiving a lot of that before we're cognitively aware of it, and the other side of the left brain. And so it is our body taking in all those messages. Our autonomic nervous systems are responding to, is this person emotionally safe, based on every other interaction I've had with them? And our bodies are keeping that data. So we're not fully cognizant of it. And I think that's why paying attention to our bodies is so important. it's a message we don't give often in evangelicalism. In fact, we say the opposite, don't trust your
Yes.
body.
Yes.
And when women's bodies are a threat, you're constantly having these weird messages. And so I think it is more
Yes.
challenging in those situations. Or like you
Mhm.
said, in Islam, where cover up your body, it's like going to tempt man. There's these 9 parts of desire. So that's really good advice. And the last thing I want to give you an opportunity to speak to is, what if there's a pastor in a church, a congregant, anybody in a church position where somebody comes out and says, either my husband's abusing me, the pastor's abusing me, any forms of abuse, whether it's emotional, financial, verbal, physical, sexual, anything. What would you say to that person in a church environment when they've been taught to just, always
Cover up.
believe the people in power? Yeah.
Yeah. Be careful that you're not trying to save the power or the institution, because that's
Mm.
anti-biblical. So a
Yeah.
lot of times pastors won't touch a marriage, even though the woman's like, I'm being abused. They're like, because they're like, I don't want this marriage to fall apart. That's not your job. Your job is to rescue the person that's claiming abuse,
Mm.
which it's very, very rare for someone to falsely claim
Yeah.
abuse, because it is very costly. I remember when Lori Ann Thompson first came out about it, and I went to my church and I said, I don't want any Robbie's teachings here anymore. They're like, why? And I was like, this woman's coming out about it. They're like, oh, they're saying she's lying. It's just, why would someone lie and have their whole life torn apart and
Right.
destroyed and their livelihood taken? Like, it is so rare for someone to come out about abuse, especially about a person in power or in a
Mm-hmm.
marriage where their marriage would fall apart, and
Right.
just going through that pain of children, custody. So I would say, don't jump into conclusion, first of all, like who's right. Like, listen to the one who's claiming abuse. Let it
Yeah.
like get them to a place of safety, and don't try to worry about the institution. What
Mm-hmm.
will happen if this news comes out to the church? Your job is not to keep an institution intact or the marriage intact. Your job, especially as Christians, we are to protect the voiceless, the innocent, the oppressed. Your job is to protect them. Now, if the church falls to pieces, it's God. Like, God is not worried about the church falling into pieces or a marriage falling to pieces. God is concerned of rescuing the person. So if you want to honor God, go rescue the person, be about rescuing the person. If something is preventing you from listening to this person and helping them, really really think about why. Is it because
Mm.
you're so afraid of the institution being affected by it, whether marriage or church? So if that's where you're going, be careful. You might be following the steps of Pharisees and religious leaders that Jesus rebuked, because they were so concerned about protecting the institution of Sabbath that they
Yeah.
were like, oh, someone's hurting. It's okay. Like, we don't want to help them. God's like, are you kidding me? Like, the institution was set there for the person. Like, it's always about helping the person. And if somehow
Yes.
you're walking by a broken person and you're not helping them, be careful that you're not the religious leaders that Jesus called out, that is so concerned about the institution that they're willing to see someone waste away, whether in a church or.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say to pastors. Be careful. Make sure you're not so concerned about the institution of whether it's marriage or someone claiming abuse by a religious leader, and really do the call that God has called you to do, which to protect the oppressed. And it
Mm.
might be costly. It might require
Yeah.
you to lay down your life and you to lose everything.
Yeah.
So,
Well put.
but
Well put.
yeah,
Yeah. People first. I mean,
people first.
it's hard at times, but it's kind of simple at the same time. So thank you for that. Well, how can people find you and your book and your writing and your speaking and reach out to you if they want you to come speak?
I just someone actually did this for me. Someone just did a website for me that has all my information and the work I do in the Middle East. It's naghmehpanahi.com. So, or they
Perfect.
can search my name and they will find information, my social media and stuff.
Yeah, we'll link that in the show notes for people to find you. Thank you so much for being on today. It's been a true honor for me to get to know you, to start our
Yeah,
friendship, and
thank
also
you.
just to
Me too.
introduce all these listeners to who you are. Um, really, thank you for being so vulnerable today, both in
Thank
your
you.
writing and what you've shared.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate you, and I appreciate this connection God has had us have.
Me too. Thanks for being here, Naghmeh. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.